cases of unexpected intrigue. I've reread the hieroglyphics and identified the tomb's original owner, he says. It was Ihi, a vizier or prime minister of King Unas. Like most wealthy, well-positioned Egyptians of his time, Ihi had spent years preparing his final resting place. So how did Princess Idut end up with it? Kanawati's answer involves a tantalising new theory about a palace coup and the mysterious circumstances surrounding King Teti's accession. We don't know where Teti came from. We just know he married a daughter of Unas and became king when his father-in-law died. I think he came to the throne by force, and he opposed him unsuccessfully. As an enduring punishment, Teti gave Ihi's tomb to a daughter. This dynastic succession that once seemed so simple is one of many episodes acquiring a new spin on Saqqara, where burials span the entire 3,000 years and 31 dynasties of the ancient Egyptian civilization. Timeline, page 12, so we'll see that in a minute. Focusing on periods when the site was most heavily used by the rich and powerful. Archeologists are discovering evidence for the kind of cloak and dagger dramas that would make headlines today. Conspiracies, assassinations, acts of revenge, scheming queens, ambitious politicians, and religious extremes. West of the emerald alfalfa fields and dusty green palm groves that flank the Nile, Saqqara rests atop a rocky escarpment the colour of ripe wheat. Here the wind-rippled desert sand begins its sweep toward Libya, and here on the sunset bank of the Nile, the ancient Egyptians believed was as close as mortal remains could get to the great beyond. In their view of the world, when the sun slipped beneath the desert horizon each evening, it travelled through the underworld ruled by Osiris, the god of the afterlife, until being reborn in the morning on the opposite side of the great river. Saqqara was part of an immense burial ground that stretched for 45 miles along the Nile. The cemeteries start at Abu Rawash in the north and continue on through Giza, Abyssinia, Saqqara, Dashur, and Maidum, explains Zahi Hawass, Secretary-General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities and a National Geographic explorer in residence, running down the modern names of sites for me in a quick tutorial. This area just south of the Nile Delta has great strategic value because the river narrows here to form a natural gateway. To control river traffic, and with it the rest of the country, kings of the very first dynasties fortified both river banks. They soon began to build palaces above the fertile floodplain, the beginning of Memphis, Egypt's early capital, and staked out their grave sites in the neighbouring desert, where relatives and officials would surround them in death as they had in life. Early tombs were cut into the bedrock and capped with a low, mud brick building known as a mastaba. Some survive as dark smudges in the ever-encroaching sand, almost in the shadow of the 4,630-year-old tomb that elevated their form and changed the shape of royal burials, the Step Pyramid. Rising skyward in 6 sand-dusted tiers, is the name of the original owner of the tomb, Hesi, vizier of King Teti. Whoever was in charge of changing the reliefs probably missed this one, just as I did. I feel like I'm visiting a crime scene with a first-rate detective. Outside there's more. A series of gouges scars the two pillars of a portico and the boating scenes that flank the door. I had dismissed the damage as vandalism. Wrong again. Hesi was depicted in those places, but he was chiselled out very meticulously, says Kanawati. The figures in these tombs are not just art, they're functional. The deceased lives through them, so to punish someone in the afterlife, you have to mutilate every figure. A man in Hesi's position likely understood that after death his car, or life force, could return to this world through the figures in his tomb. He hoped relatives and priests would bring fresh offerings to sustain his car, but in case they forgot or slacked off, he had his tomb filled with scenes that the car could use. Provided with this magic in stone, food and drink, the support of servants, the company of singers and dancers, and opportunities to fish and hunt. So we have to go to page 18. There we go. The car could continue to experience all the pleasures of the here and now. By destroying Hesi's tomb figures, someone permanently severed his access to the world of the living. What had the vizier done to be punished so severely? Plotted against King Teti, Kanawati believes. The surviving heir, Pepi I, would then have taken everlasting revenge, altering and reassigning Hesi's tomb. I can't say for sure that Teti was assassinated, but something catastrophic happened, Kanawati says. The more we look, the more evidence we find that there was a huge conspiracy. Many people were punished. Hesi was most likely one of the ringleaders, so were Teti's chief physician and the overseer of the armoury, who received the same punishment. The official in charge of the palace guard seems to have played a lesser role. Only his nose and feet were chiselled from the reliefs in his chapel. Kanawati takes me from tomb to tomb, showing me the evidence he has collected and building his case. For me, he says with a satisfied smile, it's like Agatha Christie. Excavations near Pepi I's pyramid in the southern section of Saqqara have provided enough intrigue for at least another chapter in the family saga, and new characters for me to keep straight. Audran Labrousse, director of the French archeological mission, has uncovered 7 new pyramids here. 3 belong to wives of Pepi I, including Ankh Hessen Pepi II, the most important woman of her time. She was one of 2 sisters from Abydos who married Pepi I. Labrousse begins over strong coffee in the French excavation house, which overlooks the Nile Valley from a cliff at the desert's edge. Her name means she lives for Pepi. Her sister's son, Marena, became king when Pepi I died, but he ruled for only a few years. Then Ankh Hessen Pepi's own son, Pepi II, came to the throne. He was about 6, we think, so his mother became regent. She had real power, and you can see it in her tomb. To get to her pyramid, we bounce into the desert in a Peugeot station wagon, pulling up between the pyramids of Pepi I and Marena, both now hummocks of tumbled stones. Workers enlarging an already huge arena of tombs and temples load sand into rusty carts that roll on tracks to the dumps. We follow the faint scratch of a path to the bottom of the excavation and approach a jagged stone wall that holds back a heap of rock and sand. This was a pyramid, says Labrousse, striding toward an opening at the base. You'll have to trust me. Skirting slabs of red granite that were once a portcullis, we climbed down a ladder and crouched through a low, sloping corridor. She was not a king, but she was so close, Labrousse says. Stepping into Ankhesenpepi's burial chamber, taking a flashlight from the woven excavation basket he uses as a briefcase, he shows me the sarcophagus placed to the west near the dying sun. Then he traces the hieroglyphs that rain down the stone walls, column after incised column, painted green, colour of rebirth. This queen is the first female to be buried with a text like this, he explains, amazement colouring his voice. Before her, the sacred incantations known as pyramid texts were for kings only. The deceased ruler had to pass through death to become immortal, and he did it with the help of these texts. He called out the words to make his body function again in the afterlife, or, in this case, she did. Ankhesenpepi must have been a remarkable woman. Royal wives before her had existed quietly in the background. Suddenly, she stepped forward and claimed the strongest of the king's magic spells, and that's not all. Exiting the pyramid, Labrousse leads me through the ruins of her mortuary temple to an inscribed block of white limestone. We once thought Marena was Pepi II's half-brother, but we threw out that theory when we found this, he says. It clearly states that Ankhesenpepi was the wife of Pepi I and the wife of Marena and the mother of Pepi II. The genealogy is too complicated. I shake my head, unable to work it out. Labrousse tries again. The widow of a king was no one. After the death of Pepi I, Ankhesenpepi would have gone back to the harem, but we think she managed to seduce her nephew, Marena, and fortunately she had a son, Pepi II. Now it makes sense. This woman was an early Cleopatra, alluring, savvy, ruthless. Labrousse is trying to reconstruct the plan of her mortuary temple. So far, he has a 17-ton red granite lintel, part of a limestone obelisk, and scattered stones from the walls. She's buried near Pepi I, but her tomb is turned towards Marena's, so where was the door, he wonders. The Queen's whole situation is complicated for us. Imagine how it must have been for her. Including his mother's regency, Pepi II may have reigned for more than 90 years, longer than any other king in Egyptian history. By the time he died in about 2175 BC, the central government was close to collapse, and within the next 2 decades, governors had seized control of their individual provinces. A lingering drought probably aggravated the political turmoil. Without rain, has always remained important. Tied to the city, activity at Saqqara ebbed and flowed with politics. Kings were buried elsewhere now, but the old royal burials still had the power to attract the faithful. Silverman has been studying the tombs of two Middle Kingdom priests of the cult of King Teti, long departed but still worshipped as a god. From a file he extracts an inked cutaway view of the two mortuary complexes which sit across the street from Teti's pyramid, but there's a twist. After plunging straight down, the tomb shafts sneak under the street, putting the burials beneath Teti's own sacred space. The priests, it seemed, were cozying up to the big man in the great beyond. Other kings were not nearly so beloved. Officials of New Kingdom Maverick, Akhenaten, Mavad deliberately tried to keep their distance in the afterlife, and with good reason. Several years into his reign, in about 1348 BC, Akhenaten banned worship of the traditional gods and formed a new religion around Aten, the sun disk. He also founded a new capital, Aten, modern Amarna. In the desert far to the south of Saqqara, he behaved like a maniac, says Martin Raven, curator of the Egyptian collection in the Netherlands National Museum of Antiquities. It was a shock to his contemporaries. Raven has recently uncovered the tomb of one contemporary, a high priest at the Temple of Aten in Memphis. Edging into the desert south of the Step Pyramid, the complex includes a burial shaft set in a courtyard, once forested with papyrus-shaped columns. 4 barrel-vaulted mud brick chapels mark the corners of the courtyard, and limestone reliefs decorate its walls. The owner of the tomb was named Mereneith, or at least that's how he started out. In what seems to have become a continuing scramble for political survival, Mereneith changed his name twice, first to Meria, then back to Mereneith. His tomb, built in 3 stages over the course of his career, holds the proof. In the oldest section, carved before Akhenaten's revolution, door jambs to a chapel were inscribed with the official's original name. Mereneith means beloved of the goddess Neith. Raven explains, tracing his index finger above the bracket of 2 hunting bows, tips crossed at each end, that symbolises the deity. The sign was altered, however, in the second building phase. A circle, the symbol of the sun, was carved over the bodies of the bows, and plaster was smoothed over their tips. We can see here that he changed his name to Meria, beloved of the sun, Raven says. It looks as if Mereneith felt it would further his career to drop the reference to the old goddess, take a new name that was politically correct. We move to a fragment of a wall relief that once depicted the tomb owner and his wife. All that remains of Mereneith is an arm, painted ruddy brown, but the hieroglyphs are clear. 2 bows, tips crossed, cleanly cut into the stone. They shows Nefer wearing the leopard skin of a high priest. Is this his mummy? No one knows for sure. Immortality or oblivion, which would death bring? Hoping for a happy outcome, Egyptians spent years preparing tombs replete with offerings tended by funerary priests. Tombs were portals to the afterlife. So, death. Life everlasting begins with a journey from the tomb through the underworld. The car or life force, depicted here as glowing orbs, leave the body first, followed after burial by the Ba or soul. The falcon-headed god Horus leads the Ba through doorways of fire and cobras into the hall of judgment. Judgment. The jackal-headed god Anubis weighs the deceased's heart, sight of the conscience, against the feather of Mart, or things as they should be. Osiris, king of the underworld, and other gods watches as judges. If the heart is too heavy or too light, a monster that is part